So, if you've been keeping track of the Bible prophecy videos, the last two videos we did, starting with Daniel 2, the dream of Nebuchadnezzar and his statue. We followed up with that one going to Daniel 7, speaking of the four beast kingdoms. Today we'll be discussing Daniel 8 and the vision found therein. As in chapter 7, Daniel is the recipient of the vision, a dream that features more beasts. And like both the previous visions, this one comes in two parts. First, the action and symbols, and then an explanation by a heavenly sent interpreter. Daniel wrote that in this vision, he saw by a river near which he was standing a two-horned ram that pushed westward, northward, and southward. He said no beast could withstand this ram. He did according to his will and became great. Then a male goat with a notable horn between his eyes came from the west, moving so fast that he didn't touch the ground. The ram challenged the goat with disastrous results. The goat utterly defeated him. For a while, the goat dominated the area. Soon, however, his notable horn was broken and four horns grew in its place. As Daniel continued to watch, he saw another horn appear on the scene, a little horn which grew exceedingly great. This horn challenged heaven itself and the prince of the hosts, God's sanctuary, and its sacrifices. And Daniel wrote, "This little horn cast truth down to the ground." The prophetic drama ended with a conversation. A holy one asked how long the little horn's battle against heaven would go on, when it would end. And a second holy one replied, "For 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed." Verses 13 and 14, but particularly verse 14, are focus of this central chapter and thus the whole book. At this point, the high drama had ended, but the vision had not. Daniel wrote that while he was trying to fathom what he had seen, he heard someone commission the angel Gabriel to make this man understand the vision. Gabriel began his explanation by telling Daniel the time this vision concerned. The time of the end, the latter time of the indignation. Then he began to identify the actors in the drama, and he couldn't have been more specific. The ram which thou saw having two horns, they are the kings of Media and Persia, and the male goat is the king of Greece. The large horn that is between its eyes is the first king. As for the broken horn and the four that stood up in its place, 4 kingdoms shall arise out of that nation, but not with its power. And as in the vision of the previous chapter, the animals here represent empires. In describing the two animals of chapter 8, Daniel gave a pocket history of the empires they represent. He said the ram that represented Medo-Persia had 2 horns, one of which was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. The horn that was higher than the other is a similar symbol of the bear in chapter 7 that was raised up on one side. This is very significant. Daniel is writing of this vision 12 years prior to the Medo-Persian Empire conquering Babylon. So here, Daniel is shown in the next few years, the Medes and the Persians will go to war with Greece. The Medes attained regional power before the Persians did, but the Persians soon overtook them and assumed the superior position in the empire. Daniel's description of the Greek Empire is just as concise and just as accurate. The goat with the notable horn came from the west, traveling so fast that he didn't touch the ground. Gabriel said the large horn that is between its eyes, the horn that was broken off when the goat was at the peak of its strength, is the first king. This represents Alexander the Great, who, having founded the Greek Empire, died while still in his prime. The four horns that arose in its place are four kingdoms that shall arise out of the nation, but not with its power. These horns represents kingdoms within Greece, the Greek Empire, which were established by Alexander's generals after his death. The speed in which the goat traveled reminds us of the scene that we saw in Daniel 7 of the leopard that had four wings. Both images represent the speed in which the Greek Empire would conquer. As you probably noticed, there are strong parallels between Daniel 8 and Daniel 2 and 7. But there are also enough differences to raise some questions. First, why does the vision of Daniel 8 begin with Medo-Persia and not Babylon? The answer lies in the fact that by the time God gave Daniel the vision of chapter 8, Medo-Persia was already casting its shadow over Babylon, whose rule was soon to end within the next 12 years. Second, why are the nations represented by domesticated animals such as rams and goat in chapter 8, but when in chapter 7 they are pictured as carnivorous beasts? Notice that the character of these creatures hasn't changed. They are still aggressive and domineering, but the focus of this chapter is on the sanctuary, God's temple. Rams and goats were sanctuary animals used as sacrifices in the temple service. Their use here emphasizes the fact that God's place of worship plays a major role in this chapter. Third, why does this vision jump directly from the Greek Empire to the little horn power, skipping over Rome from Daniel 2 and Daniel 7? To begin, we must observe that, just like the preceding two visions, this dream reaches all the way from Daniel's time to the end of the world. Daniel 8 adds even more detail about the little horn's activities and its intentions, making its identity as Antichrist even more apparent. Daniel ties the little horn to the original Antichrist, Satan himself, who causes some of the angels to fall into sin. In its description of the little horn's opposition to the Prince of Hosts and the sanctuary and its services, Daniel 8 sees the future work of both pagan and Christian Rome. Pagan Rome literally destroyed God's earthly sanctuary, the temple in Jerusalem, when it put down the Jewish rebellion in AD 70. It was also responsible for Jesus' crucifixion and for later persecutions of his followers. Remember, the term Antichrist can carry the familiar meaning against, but it also means in place of, which fits the biblical usage here more precisely. Unlike pagan Rome, Christian Rome's opposition to God, his sanctuary, and his people was often more subtle, though. Of course, Christian Rome did carry out a vigorous and very literal persecution of believers. Some statements in chapter 8 make it clear that this power worked through deception. He cast the truth to the ground. Through his cunning, he shall cause deceit to prosper under his hand. Basically, Christian Rome's deceit involved counterfeiting. It substituted a counterfeit Sabbath for the Sabbath of God's 10 Commandments. It substituted a counterfeit system of priests and saints for Christ's mediation on our behalf. It substituted a counterfeit sacrifice for the sacrifice of Christ. It claims that the daily Mass is one and the same sacrifice of the cross, while the Bible emphasizes that Christ's death on the cross was a one-time event. It substituted a counterfeit gospel for the true gospel, making our salvation a matter of works, of pilgrimages and penance and indulgences, rather than of resting in faith in what Christ has done for us. The vision of Daniel 8 ends on a similar note to that of the visions of Daniel 2 and 7. Like the statue of chapter 2, the little horn is broken without human hand. Verse 14, the central verse of both the chapter and the book, explains that the little horn's depredation ends with the cleansing of the sanctuary, or as other versions translate it, the restoring of the sanctuary. These words carry a complex of ideas. The sanctuary was a place of mediation, of salvation. The restoring of the sanctuary implies that it is once again functioning as God originally intended it to run, that the deceptions of the little horn have been unmasked, the Antichrist having been unveiled, and that people are turning to Christ as their mediator. They found again the gospel of righteousness by faith. The cleansing of the sanctuary implies the end-time fulfillment in real life of the ancient Hebrew ceremony. God gave the sanctuary and its sacrificial system to Israel as a living illustration of his plan for saving sinners from death. This system of worship culminated in a special service that took place in the Day of Atonement. On that day, the sanctuary, and by implication its worshipers, was to be cleansed from all the sins people had confessed there through the previous year. On that day, no one was to work. All were to participate in the service. Anyone who ignored the service was deemed to have thereby declared he or she had no need of God and was no longer considered one of his people, no longer a part of Israel. In other words, this day of cleansing was also a day of judgment. As the New Testament book of Hebrews points out, these Old Testament services reveal Christ's ministry for us today. The Day of Atonement, which ended the religious year for the Israelites, speaks to us of the day of judgment that will end this world's history. Daniel 7 says that it is this judgment that will bring the little horn Antichrist to an end, free God's people from evil, and place them in his eternal kingdom. The symbolic part of the vision of chapter 8 ends with a question and answer. The question is, how long is it going to be until the restoration, that cleansing? The answer is quite specific. 2,300 evenings and mornings, found in verse 14 of chapter 8. As this chapter closes, Gabriel confirms the accuracy of this prophecy. He says, the vision of the evenings and mornings which was told is true. He is about to explain this to Daniel when Daniel, perhaps overcome at the thought that justice won't be until many days in the future, he faints. So the chapter ends with the words, "I was astonished by the vision, but no one understood it," which was Daniel's way of saying to be continued. Chapter 9 will unlock the mysteries of the 2300 days found in Daniel 8:14.